of representations among both children and adults. Her most recent books include The Mind Behind the Musical Year, Developing Musical Intuitions, a project-based introduction to making and understanding music, and discovering the musical, and the third book is Discovering the Musical Mind, a View of Creativity as Learning. It's now my pleasure to invite Professor Jeanne Bamberger to deliver a lecture on Action and Symbol and Essential Tension. Professor Bamberger.
Well, hello everybody. Am I going to hear myself coming back?
Oh, it's clear.
Okay.
It's clear for all of you?
I'm sorry I'm here and not there. And I'm also a little bit sick, so I may cough quite a bit while we go along. But I'll do the best I can. I think what I have to say is a very counter point of view from the one you just heard. Many respects. I would love to be able to have a real conversation about it, but it's not going to happen. So I will proceed with my talk, and I think you'll hear very quickly what the differences of opinion are. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What I mean by action and symbol and the essential tension is that I've puzzled over this for a long time. How do we transform everyday knowledge that so seamlessly guides our actions into representations that hold still, to be looked at, and upon which to reflect? I think that is a very fundamental issue in teaching and learning, and I think that it would be very useful if people would realize what transformation that is. So, if students can be helped to recognize and appreciate the efficacy of what they know how to do, they can also be helped to grapple with symbolic conventions that are often expressing a distinctly different world and way of knowing it. I think that has something to say about why students, musical students, are pushing back against mathematics. Thus, I argue that the goal of teaching and learning is not to overcome the powerful means that students use for selecting for attention in managing themselves in the world around them. Rather, the goal is to help students make explicit their know-how, their knowing in action, and then to build on that potential. In this way, students gain respect for their already powerful action knowledge, while also gaining access to a repertoire of other possible foci of attention, permitting them to choose depending on when, where, and what for. Indeed, this is the foundation of a relationship in which teaching and learning become reciprocally generative. And that's the background of everything that's going to follow. But mostly, I'm going to ask you to go back in time and in concept to elementary school and elementary mathematics. It isn't even mathematics, it's arithmetic. And I'm going to show you how 6th and 7th grade children have found themselves into arithmetic, using it in order to understand what they can do in action. So it's the distinction between knowing how to do something and knowing about what it is that you know how to do. Ryle wrote a famous paper called Knowing How and Knowing That, and I think that's right where the problems are. So, I'm going to be talking about my software called Impromptu, which has turned out to have mathematical uses, but that was not at all the intention. The initial design, of Impromptu was not to introduce mathematical principles, but it was intended as an alternative approach to college-level music fundamentals courses. It was MIT students inquire into their own work in progress while working with Impromptu on composition tasks, organizing musical time that led them unexpectedly into shared math structure as a source of further understanding. Now, the actual tasks that they were involved in that generated this unexpected math involved a piece that generated percussion using Impromptu that generated a beat and then composed another percussion piece that generated a beat but no meter. And then I asked them to generate a piece that generated no beat. And then I asked them to write a mini-theory, develop a mini-theory about what generates a beat in a piece of music. In other words, if you have varied durations at the surface, how come most people can clap a beat? What's generating that beat in the music? And that was where they came up with the temporary idea that there was that if the durations at the surface were proportional, that at the beginning. Okay. But now you need to get into something about impromptu and rhythm notation, which was also accidental. It just seemed to me that for children at least, it would be simpler for them to use whole numbers instead of the fractions that we use in some countries, I know not in all. That proportionality of time should be represented through proportionality of numbers. Thus, durations of 2 following one another go twice as fast as durations of 4. Durations of 6 following one another go twice as slow as 3. Of course, this drives musicians who read standard notation quite crazy, because when I say that a 4 goes half as fast as 2, they say it should be the other way around, right? A quarter note should go faster than a half note. So then I say, well, after all, they are only fractions, at which point the musicians say to me, don't talk to me about fractions, I don't understand anything about fractions. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is a picture of the impromptu screen, and so you can see that the 12 block there is a duration of 12. And over on the left, it's being repeated 8 times. And the 6th block goes twice as fast, and so it has twice as many events in order to come out even. And you can see in the spatial analog graphic that that's also represented in the same way. Now the next slide, please. We have the same slide. Slide that begins not surprisingly, it was the mathematics. Are we on that slide? Okay. The mathematics of ratio, proportion, fractions, and common multiples college students had spontaneously put to work. However, it turns out that these are mathematical concepts that are most problematic for middle children. And this has been if anybody has any middle school, will know how true it is. It's been well documented. So I asked, could music through the mediation of impromptu help children understand and effectively use this apparently troublesome mathematics? To explore, work with a group of 6th grade children in a multicultural, mixed socioeconomic public school setting. Now, by the time they were into the session that I'm going to show you, they had been working with impromptu for about a month, so how to move around in it. It was also, the group were not selected in any way, they volunteered, and they were pretty much a cross-section of the school, which was representative, as all schools in Cambridge are, was representative of the city, so it was roughly half black and half white. The children got into the school by lottery. All the schools in Cambridge are, people request a school, but then it's a lottery that gets them in. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So we began working with children. And this session began with the children playing real drums. And they had done this kind of thing before. They had done clapping before and all of this, but this was going to be different. Simon, see, I hope you can see Simon playing on the big Indian drum. And the other children were sitting around the table, and the idea was to play a beat that went twice as fast as Simon's. So the children using their, what people have to do already, I mean, most children with a little guidance can do that. They can clap a beat that's twice as fast as somebody else's beat. And these children were able to create the 2 levels of beats. So that's an example of know-how, which is now going to become an example of know-about. Next slide. So I asked, use it through the mediation of impromptu. Oh, I went the wrong way, didn't I? We now asked the children to make a drum piece using impromptu that worked like the one they had just played together. So now they were going to have to go from their own action, which was completely flawless, to some kind of a representation using the particular representational scheme of impromptu. So what they had to do was make one of impromptu's percussion instruments play a slow, steady, like Simon's, and the other instrument was playing quite fast, like the kids clapping. Next symbol. And this was on the left, you see Sam's solution. On the right, you see Anna's solution. So Sam's solution is to have a drum block of 4, that is a duration of 4, repeating 6 times, and a duration of 2, also repeating 6 times. But Anna's solution was to have a duration of 6, played 10 times, and a duration of 3, played 20 times. Can we hear them? Can we hear them? And how about Anna's? Can we hear Sam's again? Or you can't go backward? Well, you can see it. At any rate, yeah. So, that's interesting. And by the way, this is a school where children are learning from each other. There's a lot of conversation and a lot of discussion. And Max said, how do you make them come out even? Because Anna's do, but Sam's faster beat stopped Tootsie. Now this turns out to be a rather profound question, which the children now plunge into. Next slide. So Anna explained, like 3 is twice as fast as 6, so the repeat has to be twice as much too. So Sam tried it, and he made both of his repeats. He made his 4 repeat 6 and his 2 repeat 12, but he had a different way of explaining it. He said it works because the 2 is half as big, so it gets twice as many repeats as the 4. I mean, twice as much is the same. That is 12 and 6, 4 and 2. But it's in reverse. 4 is to 2, like 6 is to 12, only upside down. Okay, now, I don't know whether you mathematicians find that particularly profound, but I think here we have moving back and forth between action disappearing in time and school-based symbolic reasoning. The children held time still to look at, and knew how to do already. Yeah. Okay, so here we have music teaching back. But my real question was, I wonder how much of this is going to influence the way they feel their clapping, or the way they listen to music, or whether they, in any case, I think they have the idea that music has structure, and that it is organized, and they are in fact organizing. The next thing that happened was that Joe built a table with all of the proportional drumming, an 8 and a 4, a 6 and a 3, a 4 and a 2, and a 5 and a 10. Then he played it for everybody, and he said, well, they're just equivalent fractions. Now, pairs of tentatively, iteratively sounding events that are different in absolute speed, but the same in their internal relations. So what happened was that the equivalence of equivalent fractions could be heard. Now, by the way, my friend Andy DeSessa, who's a physicist and teaches science education here in Berkeley, has helped me try to understand the mathematics that's going on here. And he said the children generated coherent musical structure in an environment joining media, numbers, spatial representations, and sound and time, while giving meaning to equivalent fractions as proportions. Now go to the next one. We'll hold that for a moment. So the question is, what are the musical implications here, and what are the mathematical or arithmetic representations, I would say. Now, I feel a little embarrassed because I realize that this is baby stuff, but I think it has very much to do with education and with learning, because of this move between action and symbol, which is a generative tension, and we're involved with it all the time. If we try to describe what we do when we're walking, which arm is going with which leg, all of the things that we know how to do in action, without even thinking about it, and that's the whole point, we have great trouble representing in some symbolic fashion. But if you ask children to do that, to try to invent a representation, which I've done quite a bit of, if you ask them to invent a representation find out a lot about what they know intellectually, conceptually. Okay, so I wanted to move a little ahead and show you what the college students did with these kinds of tasks. This task involved, by the way, these MIT students are, like the previous speaker described, they're innocent musically, mostly. They are often taking music courses because they're required to, and they try to bring their knowledge to the musical activities, which was very informative and insightful to me. So I asked them to make 3 different percussion accompaniments. One was the metric hierarchy that the tune generated, a varied accompaniment that reinforces that hierarchy, and an accompaniment that conflicts with the tune but is not chaotic. And then they had to write a paper. They had to watch their process of doing these things, keep notes, and try from this to understand their own understanding of music and their own understanding of numbers, as it turned out. So the next, this was an example of metric hierarchy. Before you listen to it, you should see what the student said in the paper, having watched himself develop. I found the tactics to be, you need to know we had a sort of special language for things. The meter I call the grouper beat, because that's what it is, groups tactics. And it is unfortunately represented by the bar line, which stops everything. And the divider, that was the divider of the tactics, should be 4. These multiples of 4 made sense, too, because there was never a moment when I was left clapping awkwardly at nothing. And that, I thought, was a wonderful example of this move from symbol to action to symbol. The text is accompaniment by clapping. Okay, can we hear it now? His reinforcing example. It works well for reinforcing the rhythmic hierarchy without being confusing, because everything is expressed in powers of 2, which happens to be the way that early, the name of the piece, that early lends itself easily to splitting. Now, you get a whole different picture of how arithmetic is being used than with the little kids. It's much more interactive in the sense of going from music from sound to symbol, and from symbol to sound. And also the taking into account the fact that all of this is taking place in time. And we seem to forget that when we begin stopping everything by representing it in symbols or in graphs. It gets closer to including the time in the kind of graphs we looked at with this last speaker. But it's still stopping it in the sense that you can look at the whole thing, or these big chunks of it. When in fact, in listening to actual music, of course, everything disappears. And you have to be remembering what happened before in order to understand what's coming next. Okay, that was his reinforcing. And here was his conflicting example. And said, the first line verges on some chaos. That's the first line of accompaniment. One does not come easily upon a multiple of 4 until the very end, which grants it the clumsiest feel of the 3 parts. Now, what he's talking about here is the fact that he's talking about the addition, which turns out to be really important. So 2 plus 3 and 3 is 6, is that right? Yes. And 1 is 7 and 10, and you don't get to a multiple of 4 until the very end. And since 4 is the tactics, it's definitely going to create conflict. Now, even these kinds of questions, what reinforces the metric hierarchy? What generates conflict? So he's basically coming up with a theory that if you have an accompaniment that is is a multiple of 4, which is the tactics. In other words, if you have an accompaniment which is not corresponding to the tactics, until the very end, you're definitely going to have conflict. Then he goes on to say the third line writes itself at the halfway in a roundabout way. Similarly, to the second line, the least conflicted, it is entirely composed of well-behaved 2 intervals. Okay, so the third line writes itself midway through 2, 4, 6, 9, 12. So there's going to be less conflict there than in the first line. It's very funny to be sitting here talking and not having any, I have no idea what you're making of all of this, or it's just very strange to be sitting here and not seeing you, but I'll go on. So, learning. This is ending again. We infer from these examples with multiple impromptu representations and their immediate sound back, and these steps towards helping students robustly understand, possibly generalize, school for personal reasons, how it applies to making coherent use of structures, and how it might be useful in a range of multiple possible situations. So I hope that all of this has not turned into how to use or abuse music to teach math. I don't think that's the case with the college students. The next slide, but this essential tension remains in making descriptions of ourselves in motion. We seek ways to hold time and motion still, to contain and bound, to make bits and pieces of our going on. And I think that's necessarily, to keep trying to do that, to stop time, and to make continuous sound into bits and pieces. This is a tension we all experience as we move back and forth between sounding action, disappearing in time, and discrete, analytical, symbolic representations. Next slide. And here is William James saying what I just said. The same returns not, save to bring the different. Time keeps building into new moments, every one of which presents content which is, in its individuality, never was before and will never be again. And yet we keep trying to say what we can say, find what we can say about generalizing, when in fact there is no repetition even. As one little girl said when we were asking about why this, it's a long story, but the end of the story is she said, it will never be the same because it's later. And here is Lee Smolin, who's a physicist who wrote a very interesting book recently called Time Reborn. And he's saying by succumbing to the temptation to conflate the representation with the reality and identify the records of motion, the motion itself. These scientists have taken a big step toward the expulsion of time from our conception of nature. And it makes me very sad that continues to happen, but I guess we have to go both ways. We have to go from the action to the representation, and then we have to come back again to the representation, and supposedly it will be conformed. Thank you.